Welcome to CoBB, Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharan Raghavan.
So there you are again, Sharan. Who annoyed you this week?
Why do you ask that?
This is a pattern that I'm sure I, as well as our listeners, have sort of picked up. Whenever somebody annoys you, you tend to return to basics.
Okay, fair enough, but you aren't completely wrong. But nobody's annoying me this week. It's
Okay.
about it's about what we do at CoBB, right? We're about busting jargons and simplifying things. But sometimes you've got to go back to the basics and use certain words and explain what that jargon means, so that it becomes clear to everybody what exactly the process of marketing is.
So therefore, now which jargon are you busting today?
It's positioning versus proposition.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I've seen people not being very clear of these two words, and these two really weighty words. Okay, fair enough. Positioning and proposition. Yeah. Too often I've seen a lot of marketers get to proposition very fast, try to make some creative line because
Yeah.
that is what shines out. Just do it.
Yeah. So when marketers do it, the system kind of takes care of them and hopefully sorts them out, says who does what. But when you work with entrepreneurs like I do, and the smaller businesses, the family businesses, everybody, as we've said this before, right? When we talk about brand building and marketing, people only think of advertising.
Yeah.
And everybody just wants to be creative and start solving for the creative aspects of it without setting the fundamentals of the positioning of the brand in place.
Okay.
And it also doesn't remain consistent as you go on. And each one has got it goes by the creative whim of the people.
Yeah.
That is what we need to correct.
Okay. So fair. So let's hit the reset button. Now, what is positioning and what is proposition?
Okay. So I'll go to the bookish definition of positioning. Positioning is about how you want your brand to be perceived by consumers in relative to the competition that you face. It's a strategic positioning that it's a strategic decision that you take. And it remains for the long term. When I say long term, it's not forever. It lasts anywhere between 5 to 10 years at least. Take, for example, Tata Motors. I know we've been going back to Tata Motors for a couple of episodes now because that's been in my head. I've just been watching them. So they position themselves as the leader in safe, sustainable mobility.
Safe, sustainable mobility. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And the proposition, on the other hand, is the promise that you make to consumers about the value you are going to deliver.
Okay.
For Tata Motors, the proposition could be the most affordable, safe, innovative electric car with high performance. That's the promise they're making to the customer, the consumer.
Okay. So proposition is the promise, and positioning is how you differentiate yourselves, how are you perceived by the consumer
In relative
differently
to
from the
competition.
consumers.
Exactly.
Okay. Fair. Now, okay, so theoretically it is clear to me. Now practically, you want a positioning statement that is obviously that differentiates you, but you want it to be actionable. How do you get to that?
You get that. I use a simple framework. It's for dash who dash the brand provides dash because dash.
Very nice. I could understand it. Can you please explain this a bit more clearly?
Right. So for whom? The target audience. Who are your target audience? So for whom? And who are looking for what? Who? The second dash is like for dash who dash. The first dash is for the target audience who are looking. What are they seeking? And then the brand offers. What does the brand offer them is the third point. It says how are you mainly differentiated from competition? The last dash is a because dash, saying what is the reason that your target audience should believe you are justifiably different from competition.
So this is a reason to believe.
Kind of, but it's not exactly.
Okay.
So we'll come to that.
Okay. Okay, fair. So just explain this with an example. I think it'll become clearer to anybody who's listening to us.
So sticking to the Tata Motors, right?
Okay. Okay.
For the environmentally conscious consumers,
Hmm.
okay, that's the target audience. That's how you're framing them. The environmentally conscious consumers. What are they looking for? Who seek affordable, reliable electric vehicles.
Hmm.
Tata Motors provides innovative, high performing electric cars.
Hmm.
Tata Motors differentiates itself through its focus on sustainability, backed by significant investments in safety, EV technology, and charging infrastructure that they're claiming to be setting up. Does that make sense?
So all these three that you stated are reasons why a consumer should believe your positioning state.
That is the positioning statement. It doesn't have to face the consumer just yet. It is
Okay.
a positioning statement is more internalized. The proposition is what eventually reaches the consumer.
Okay.
So the
Fair.
positioning statement is completely internal.
Understood. So fair. I think that this seems fine. It flows quite logically and seems quite practical.
Okay. Do you
Yeah,
want to
works for me.
try you want to try this framework?
Okay, let's do this.
Maggie?
Maggie. So for parents who have young children who are looking for tasty, quick
Mhm.
and tasty meal slash snack options for them, right? Then offer, which is Maggie, provides a delicious 2-minute noodles that is differentiated because of its characteristic taste and years of trust, right? Yeah, that's it largely. And, comes from the house of Nestle, therefore, credibility and presence in market, etc.
It's perfect. See, now I want to put out a caveat here, a disclaimer of sorts, that even for listeners, that brand managers of Tata Motors and Maggie who are listening to this might completely disagree because this is born of the brand strategy.
Correct.
Now, internally, they would be privy to the strategy of these brands. From the outside, we don't have that view.
Hmm.
We are framing this under the assumption of the strategy that we make by watching these brands from the outside. That's what it
Hmm.
is. So it doesn't have to be correct. It's more the framework that we are trying to talk about, saying how you can do it for any brand that you're working on.
So, for example, if one were to do this for atta noodles, then the consideration for healthier option
Yes.
would start coming in the definition of the target segment who are looking for healthier options as compared to other noodle brands, and would also come into the offer then.
Yeah. So let's see, let's do that also, right? For busy parents of young children who are looking for healthier meal slash snack options that are quick
Hmm.
to make, Maggie provides delicious 2-minute atta noodles.
Hmm.
And this is differentiated from the other options because it's got the strengths of atta and it can still be made in the 2 minutes is promising.
Hmm.
Continues to come from Maggie and Nestle.
Cool. So now, in the past, I remember we have spoken about FAB,
Right.
features, advantage, benefit. Now, is that and your positioning, are they the same?
Definitely remember the Fab
Or is
Ladder.
it the proposition?
It's neither. But I
Okay.
do remember the healthy chocolate and the Fab Ladder that we put together.
Yes. Yes.
So the ladder breaks down your attributes and benefits and features. But the proposition distills this into a concise consumer promise.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I remember in some of the classes that I take online,
Hmm. Hmm.
I take the example of Coke, for
Hmm.
example, or
Right.
Pepsi, for example. Pepsi can. Now, Pepsi can, in features, it is Pepsi. It's a cola drink, black in color, quenches thirst when served cold, etc., etc. Right? So all of that. Then the advantage is that it's uh, and it is in a can, etc., etc. So Advantage is it makes you look stylish, and you can it quenches your thirst, right? Benefit actually is the coolest way to quench thirst, right?
Right.
And the proposition line that the brand use is har ghoont mein swag hai, right? So that's just a creative way of saying the same thing, that every swig is stylish, right? Or you can say that, yeah, stylish way to quench your thirst.
If you look at it, interesting that you said Coke and Pepsi, because if you did the FAB and proposition, the features and attributes for both will be the same, almost identical.
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
in the benefit and the proposition where these two brands will differentiate.
Correct. One of
Which
them will
is
go much more youth. The second will go more family, more
exactly.
okay, universal audience. Okay. So therefore, broadly, what we are saying is that you create a fab to possibly, distill all these elements, and then it feeds into your proposition.
Correct. It turns the granular details into a consumer facing promise that the brand can make.
Okay. Fair. Understood. Now, we spoke about positioning. We spoke about proposition. We spoke about how are they different from FAB, right? Now, I spoke about one more term earlier, RTB, reason to believe. Now, isn't positioning in parts or in total reason to believe?
No, in fact, it's different.
Okay.
The proposition is the promise you make, and the RTB is the proof of you delivering on that promise, that giving hope, the thing you are capable of
Okay.
delivering on the promise you're making.
Yeah. Okay. Understood.
Let's go back to Tata Motors for this. It's a good one. So they are talking about driving sustainability. That's what they're talking about now. Now, what are the RTBs? What are the reasons to believe that justify to the consumer that Tata Motors is capable of delivering this promise? It's actually safe driving sustainability. The three things, what they say, right? So they're setting up a robust charging infrastructure. They have great customer testimonials. So in fact, even the communication is about different use cases of an electric car and how easy it is to charge wherever you go. And the investments that they're doing in safety technology. And if you remember a few years ago, there was a report saying how Indian cars are less safe. And they have made it a point to invest in enhancing the safety features of all their cars, even if they're electric and they're light and all that. These are the reasons to believe that Tata Motors is capable of delivering on your safety driving and sustainable options.
Understood. So reason to believe is just to make sure that the proposition doesn't sound hollow and there's sufficient backing behind it. Okay. Sometimes you might not need reason to believe. I was just thinking through the name Cadbury brings a great taste with itself. Now, when we advertise Silk, it was greater tasting chocolate, best tasting chocolate that India could have seen, but we did not express any reason to believe to the consumer. While we had the reason to believe written out in the positioning statement, there is a reason why it is the best tasting chocolate, but to the consumer, we never stated it.
I know you didn't state it, but what you carried there was that the brand Cadbury was already justifying, was the reason to believe itself. It didn't have to be called out because the equity of Cadbury carried on for this delivery. Sometimes you don't have to call out the RTB if you're getting endorsed by a brand which is already carrying the weight of equity.
Cool. Okay. Now, proposition and positioning, can they exist independently?
Like we were just discussing, it can. See, a brand might focus only on positioning, create a very strong emotional connection, and fail to communicate a clear proposition.
Okay.
And they could still succeed. So if you look at a lot of the luxury brands, right, most of them survive by virtue of being positioned as luxury brands. They don't really make a promise. The implied promise, like we said with Cadbury and Silk, is that you will be looked at with respect, you will be taken seriously in settings, you'll be treated as elite of society, but that all comes from the positioning. They never say it out aloud. It is the only way how they're positioning it and how the company behaves internally. For example, take Rolex. You can't buy a Rolex.
Hmm.
You
So
go,
that's a positioning statement.
that is a positioning without the proposition. The proposition is just built on its own. And it's very rare case. It doesn't happen very often. If you try to say, I'm going to create a designer brand today, and I'm not going to do a proposition, I'm just going to position myself. You might succeed over about 15, 20 years, but it's not something that you will accelerate your growth with. And look at the flip side. A proposition which does not have a clear positioning will say, it's like saying you have, I'm a natural personal care brand and I'm using only clear stuff and all that. But so what? There are so many brands that say it. Unless, for example, like Kama Ayurveda, it's like I am luxury Ayurveda and I use only the natural things. I am tied up with an Aryaveda pharmacy to create these products for you. Then the narrative holds. Without a clear positioning that I am a luxurious Ayurveda indulgence brand, personal care brand, the it can sound very loose. It has nothing to be anchored to if you don't have a positioning for your proposition that you build. That is exactly the mistake a lot of people do.
Okay. Okay, fair. So what we're saying is a positioning without proposition, okay, will take a lot of time and might sound very laborious or hollow. And a proposition without positioning will, might not register, might not seem differentiated,
At all.
and people might completely forget it.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Only when both work together is there magic to be created.
And, when we usually talk about topics, we also say what are the common mistakes that people make. I remember at the start of the podcast, this particular episode, you said that a lot of people clearly jump onto a creative, which is largely in the proposition space, without thinking about positioning, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Is there any other mistake that people make around this? Or that's the
That is
most
the biggest
cardinal one?
mistake. That is the biggest mistake. Unless you have your positioning in place, you have no idea what your proposition is going to say. And each person in the system will start making very different promises to the consumer at the level that they're operating at. And that just is a recipe for disaster.
Okay. So therefore, okay. And to fix this, what should one do?
Simple. Start by ensuring that your positioning is very clear in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And your proposition is aligned with your brand's positioning that you've decided on. And obviously, you'll have to check if that's serving a consumer's need. So for that, you do all your tests before you get your positioning sorted. Do your tests, find out where the opportunity is, get your positioning set. Then with your proposition, test with consumers. Is this promise working with consumers or not? Talk to your target audience. Does it resonate with them? Does it ring a bell for them? And that will give you clarity. And once you have clarity, you will know how to make it consistent across every touch point, like you described for Silk, right? Even the rapper was continuing to make the same promise that they saw on a TVC. That is the consistency you need to have.
Okay. Now, Sharan, you also said that the positioning and proposition doesn't stay consistent or constant over a period of time. They evolve. Why did you say that?
See, like you said, a lot of the brands have stayed in the same positioning, which is perfectly fine. But in a fast changing industry or a fast changing market, sometimes a brand has got to recheck if they are in the right positioning and have the right proposition. And if they're not keeping up with the market that's fast evolving, then they tend to lose out on the good work that they've done. So you have to keep in tune with the market or you will lose relevance. Tata Motors, right? Tata Motors, when they started, they were not about sustainability and safety. They were another family car, affordable family car. And the primary incentive to look at Tata Motors was that it was from Tata and it was made in India. It wasn't, unlike a foreign collaboration, it was completely made in India. And that was the primary driver for Tata Motors. And that's what you saw in the cars also, right? The Indica V2. It was the first passenger car built in India. Then it evolved. Then it evolved to today, where they've repositioned themselves, like you said, as the leader in safe, sustainable mobility. Now, the current positioning emphasizes what? Innovation, environmental friendliness. It's aligning with the global trends, latest in technology. If you look at this Tata Nexon, right, it embodies a complete shift. You will not put a Tata Indica and a Nexon next to each other. They will not even look like they're from the same brand. And they still, however, are not compromising on performance, safety, or affordability. That is the magic that they've managed to kind of evolve with. I'm sure this evolution was not entirely voluntary, but the fact that they've evolved shows enough of an agility for an organization like Tata to continue progress in the right direction for this.
Excellent. No, I love this, Sharan. I think while we have tried to completely get to the skeleton of Tata Motors, what this episode does very well is, number one, explain the clear difference between proposition and positioning, which is, like we're saying, regardless of whether you're a brand marketer or you're a startup owner, etc., it becomes critical for you to understand that positioning gives you the right backbone. It inspires the work that you're going to do, and what you promise because of the positioning is your proposition. And what you've also told is that both of them should get aligned, otherwise they'll either feel hollow, or they will completely got into a space where they'll not be memorable. And we also spoke about the fact that over a period of time you might need to evolve it depending on how your consumer or your industry is shaping. If you're jumping straight to the creative output or the proposition, then you might end up in the wrong space and will not create a sustainable brand behind you.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharan.
Thank you for listening to CoBB, Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharavana Raghavan. Subscribe and learn more at cobcast.net.